Tonight, you will listen to stories about the parts of yourself you've spent years trying to hide, the anger you've judged as weakness, the jealousy you've deemed unworthy, the fear you've pushed into shadows. But here, in this quiet darkness, you're invited not to fight these visitors anymore, but to meet them with unexpected kindness. These 8 stories of Buddhist wisdom from across centuries and cultures offer a different path, the way of embracing your shadows, of discovering wholeness, not by banishing darkness, but by learning that even your most difficult emotions hold gifts you've not yet opened. This video offers contemplative stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom, created for rest and reflection, not medical or therapeutic advice. If you find these stories meaningful, please like this video or share it with someone who might benefit. Your support helps this content reach others seeking peace during sleepless nights. Tonight's teachings journey through Korean mountain temples, Tibetan monasteries, Vietnamese gardens, and Japanese meditation halls. You'll meet monks who discovered that their greatest struggles became their wisest teachers. Kings who found freedom not in perfection, but in accepting their flawed humanity. Hermits who learned that wholeness comes not from cutting away parts of ourselves, but from inviting every rejected piece back home. You don't need to remember these stories. Let them sink beneath your thinking mind, deeper than analysis or effort. Your breath can carry you there. Feel the weight of your body against what holds you. Notice how your shoulders might soften just a little, how your jaw might unclench. You're not alone in this darkness. Every human who has ever lived has wrestled with their shadows, has felt the weight of self-judgment, has believed parts of themselves were too broken to accept. And yet here you are, brave enough to stop fighting, wise enough to listen. In the mountains of Western Tibet, in a time when snow leopards still walked freely through high passes and prayer flags snapped against wind so cold it could freeze breath mid-air, there lived a man whose green-tinged skin marked him as different from any other hermit in those peaks. His name was Milarepa, and the villagers who glimpsed him moving between cave retreats would whisper that he had eaten nothing but nettle soup for so many years that the very color of humility had seeped into his flesh. But this was not how his story began. Milarepa was born as Turpa Ga, meaning joyous to hear, in a home filled with silk carpets and the warm scent of butter tea. His father was a successful merchant who traveled the trade routes between Tibet and Nepal, returning with stories and copper bells and bolts of fabric that shimmered like water. His mother sang while she worked, her voice echoing through rooms where servants moved quietly and where young Milarepa and his sister played games in afternoon light that poured golden through high windows. He was 7 years old when his father fell ill with a fever that no amount of prayer or medicine could break. Within weeks, the merchant died, and in his final hours, he wrote a will that seemed simple enough. His brother and sister-in-law would hold the family wealth in trust until Milarepa came of age. They would care for his wife and children. They gave their word before witnesses, hands pressed together in solemn promise. The day after the funeral, everything changed. Milarepa's aunt and uncle moved into the family home and claimed it as their own. They took the silk carpets and the copper bells. They dismissed the servants and put Milarepa's mother to work, grinding barley and hauling water. They dressed Milarepa and his sister in rags and fed them scraps meant for dogs. When Milarepa's mother protested, his uncle struck her across the face and told her she should be grateful for a roof over her head. For years, this continued. Milarepa learned what it meant to be hungry, to feel the burn of humiliation when other children laughed at his torn clothes. to watch his mother's back bend under the weight of water buckets, while his aunt sat in the room that had once been his mother's, wearing his mother's jewelry. He learned to recognize the particular taste of rage, how it starts as something sharp and metallic in the back of the throat, then spreads like poison through the chest until it becomes the only thing you can feel. His mother's grief hardened into something else entirely. She would sit in the small corner room where they slept and speak in a voice that frightened Milarepa more than his uncle's violence ever had. She spoke of revenge. She spoke of making them pay. She spoke of a darkness that could reach across valleys and destroy everything his uncle had stolen. When Milarepa turned 15, his mother sold what little they had left, her last piece of silver jewelry, hidden all those years, and she used the money to send him away. Not to learn a trade or to find honest work, but to find teachers who could instruct him in the blackest of magics. She made him swear, with tears streaming down both their faces, that he would not return until he could destroy their enemies. "If you come back without this power," she told him, gripping his shoulders with hands that had become rough as stones, "I will kill myself before your eyes. I will die knowing you abandoned us to this shame." So Milarepa went, and he learned. He found masters who taught him to bend weather and break minds, who showed him how to channel rage into spells that could collapse roofs and stop hearts. He was a gifted student, perhaps because his hatred was so pure, so distilled by years of watching his family suffer. Within months, he had learned what should have taken years. The night he returned to his village, there was a wedding celebration at his uncle's house, the house that had been his father's house, filled with people drinking chung and laughing, celebrating the marriage of his cousins. Milarepa sat on a hillside above the village and spoke words that had been taught to him in darkness. He felt the power move through him like ice water through his veins. The house collapsed. 35 people died, including his uncle, his aunt, and both of his cousins with their new spouses. The screams carried across the valley. In the morning, there was nothing but rubble and grief. When the surviving villagers threatened retaliation, Milarepa summoned hailstorms that destroyed their entire harvest. Crops that had taken months to grow were beaten into mud in a single afternoon. Children would go hungry that winter. Old people would die. And it was his doing. His mother was satisfied. She had her revenge. But Milarepa found that satisfaction tasted like ashes. He began to dream of the wedding guests he had killed. In his dreams, they would turn to look at him just before the ceiling collapsed, and their faces were not the faces of strangers but the faces of people he had known as a child, the baker who had once given him sweet bread when his father was alive, the weaver who had taught him to count as she worked her loom. In his dreams, they asked him why, and he had no answer that made the screaming stop. During the day, he forgot to eat. At night, he couldn't sleep. The power he had wielded so confidently began to feel like a weight he carried in his chest, something dark and heavy that made it hard to breathe. He looked at his hands and saw them covered in blood that no one else could see. This was how he came to understand the nature of the shadow he had embraced, the rage that had felt so righteous, so justified by years of suffering, had not healed anything. It had not restored his family's honor or brought back his father. It had only added more suffering to a world already heavy with it. He had become the very thing he hated, someone who hurt the innocent to satisfy his own pain. One morning, Milarepa left his mother's house without telling her where he was going. He walked for days, asking everyone he met if they knew of a teacher who could show him a way to undo the karma he had created, a path that might lead somewhere other than the hell realms he knew awaited him. Eventually, people directed him to a lama named Rongton. a kind man who listened to Milarepa's confession without judgment. But after hearing the full story, Wrongton shook his head. "I cannot help you," he said gently. "The karmic weight you carry requires a master of greater power than I possess. There is a translator named Marpa who lives to the south. He is the one who can purify what you have done. He is the one you need." So Milarepa traveled again, carrying his shame like stones in his pockets, until he found Marpa's compound, a substantial property on the border regions, with good land and livestock and students coming and going. Marpa was a stocky man with eyes that seemed to see through to the back of your skull, and when Milarepa prostrated himself and confessed everything he had done, Marpa's face showed neither disgust nor pity. "So you wish to practice the Dharma?" Marpa asked. "More than anything," Milarepa said. "I would give anything to be free of this burden." "Then build me a tower," Marpa said, pointing to a spot on the eastern border of his land. "Round, 4 stories high, and you will do it alone. When it is finished, I will teach you." Milarepa set to work with desperate energy. He carried stones from the riverbed, one by one. He mixed mortar with his bare hands until his fingers bled. He worked from dawn until long after dark, sleeping only a few hours each night. After months of labor, the tower was nearly finished. Marpa came to inspect it. He walked around it slowly, then looked at Milarepa. "This is all wrong," he said. "Take it down. Every stone back to where you found it. Start again." Milarepa felt something break inside him, but he did as he was told. Stone by stone, he dismantled what he had built. Then he started over. This happened 4 times. 4 times he built towers, each one slightly different: oval, triangular, semicircular. 4 times Marpa ordered him to tear them down. And during all this time, whenever Milarepa begged for teachings, Marpa would beat him or drive him away with harsh words. Other students received instructions. Other students sat in meditation. But Milarepa only carried stones and mixed mortar and tore down what he had built. His back bent under the weight of rocks. His hands became gnarled and scarred. And the darkness inside him, the shame and rage and grief, had nowhere to go but into the work. There came a day when Milarepa's back was covered in sores from carrying stones, when he could barely stand from exhaustion, when he had been sent away from yet another request for teaching with nothing but curses. He sat by the river and thought about dying. It would be so easy to walk into the water and let it carry him away. He had destroyed so many lives. Perhaps his death would balance some small part of that scale. But even as he thought this, he understood something that had been hidden beneath all his desperation. Marpa was not punishing him. Marpa was purifying him. Every stone he carried up the hill was a life he had taken. Every bucket of mortar was mixed with the tears he had never allowed himself to cry. Every time he dismantled what he had built, he was learning to let go of the person he had been, the boy consumed by rage, the student of black magic who had wielded power without wisdom. The towers had never been about building. They had been about breaking down the fortress he had built around his own heart. When Milarepa finally understood this, he walked back to Marpa's house on legs that barely held him, and he prostrated himself one more time. But this time, he was not asking for teachings about magic or power. He was asking for something much harder, the courage to face what he had done, to accept it fully, to carry it without letting it crush him into nothing. Marpa looked at him for a long time. Then, for the first time, he smiled. "Now you are ready," he said. "Now I can teach you." And so Milarepa's real training began not in building towers, but in sitting with every uncomfortable truth he had spent years trying to escape. Marpa taught him to meditate on the emptiness of self, on the impermanence of all things, on the truth that the boy who had cast those spells was already gone, had never really existed as a solid, unchanging thing. What remained was a human being who had caused tremendous suffering and who now had a choice to let that define him forever, or to transform it into something else. Milarepa learned to sit with his shame without drowning in it. He learned to acknowledge the darkness he carried without identifying as darkness itself. He learned that accepting what he had done was not the same as excusing it. It was the first step toward ensuring he would never cause such harm again. In the cave retreats that would later make him famous, Milarepa practiced a meditation that Marpa had taught him to invite every demon, every dark thought, every memory of what he had done, to sit with him like honored guests. He would say, "I see you, Ein Raga. I see you, shame. I see you, grief. Come, let us sit together." And he would offer them the only thing he had to give, his complete attention, without judgment, without trying to push them away. This practice did not make the memories disappear. It did not erase his karma or undo the suffering he had caused. But it transformed his relationship to his shadow. The darkness was still there, but it was no longer in control. It had become, instead, a teacher. Years later, when students sought him out in his mountain caves, they would find a man whose green-tinged skin spoke of the most austere practice, whose songs of realization carried the authority of someone who had descended to the deepest hell and climbed back out. They would ask him how he had achieved such spiritual attainment, and he would tell them his story, not hiding the murders, not softening the darkness. "If someone like me can transform," he would say, "then anyone can. The path is not reserved for those who have never stumbled. It is especially for those of us who have fallen so far we thought we could never stand again." He taught them what Marpa had taught him, that the very qualities we most despise in ourselves can become the fuel for our awakening. That rage, when fully acknowledged and understood, reveals itself as a deep caring that has been wounded. That shame, when faced directly, becomes humility. That the capacity to cause great harm is the same capacity, when transformed, that allows us to generate great compassion. Milarepa lived to be old, dwelling in caves so high that only the most dedicated students would make the journey. And in those thin-aired places where wind and silence were the only sounds, he sang songs that wove together the darkness and the light, never pretending one could exist without the other. He sang of how acceptance is not passive, it is the most active thing we can do, requiring more courage than any revenge. He sang of how we cannot become whole by cutting away the parts we find unacceptable, but only by gathering every piece, even the sharpest, and finding where each one fits in the mosaic of who we are. And when his last student asked him what he had learned from his long life, from his journey through darkness and into something that looked like light, Milarepa smiled with a face weathered by decades of wind and said, "I learned that I was never separate from the people I harmed. Their suffering was my suffering. And in accepting that truth fully, without looking away, I found the only kind of freedom that matters." He died in a cave, wrapped in the cotton robe that gave him his name, surrounded by students who would carry his songs into the next century. And even now, his story is told not as a tale of a saint who was always pure, but as the story of a human being who looked at the worst thing he had ever done and chose to let it teach him, rather than define him. Let that truth settle now, like snow on the high peaks. You carry your own shadows, different from Milarepa's, but just as heavy. Perhaps tonight you can begin to imagine sitting with them, not as enemies to be defeated, but as parts of yourself that have been exiled for too long, that are tired of hiding, that want only to be seen. The darkness you judge most harshly in yourself is not your enemy. It is the teacher you have been running from. The darkness you judge most harshly in yourself is not your enemy. It carries the lessons you need most. And when you finally turn to face it, when you say, "I see you with the same courage Milarepa found in that cave," you discover that wholeness was always there, waiting for you to stop fighting and simply notice that nothing needs to be cast out, only accepted, transformed, and brought home. Your breath moves in and out, carrying you deeper than thought. Feel your body held by what supports it. Let your jaw soften. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Milarepa's courage is not separate from your courage. His capacity to face himself is the same capacity that lives in you, ready to be discovered. And as you rest here, notice how the stories we tell about ourselves can shift. How the villain of your own narrative might, when seen with compassionate eyes, reveal itself as a wounded child trying to protect something precious. How the parts you've exiled might, when invited back, become sources of strength you didn't know you had. We carry on now, moving from Tibet's high peaks to other landscapes where other seekers learned this same wisdom. Let your breath guide you, in and out, as we journey together into the next story. In 12th century Korea, when mountain monasteries clung to steep slopes like barnacles to ships, and the sound of the moktak drum marked the hours of meditation as precisely as the movements of stars, there lived a young monk named Jinwo who could not stop judging himself. His birth name had been Jong, given to him by parents who ran a small inn near the southern coast, where travelers heading to Baekje would stop for barley tea and rice cakes wrapped in oak leaves. He had been a bright child, quick to learn the Chinese characters his father taught him by candlelight, quick to memorize the poems that merchants would recite over evening meals. When he was 15, a traveling monk stayed at the inn and spoke of mountains where the air was so clear you could see your own Buddha nature reflected in morning dew. And young Jong knew with absolute certainty that he belonged in such a place. His parents wept when he left, but they did not stop him. The monk, Master Yonghui, accepted him into the Sagulsan monastery and gave him the ordination name Jinwul, which meant true moon. It was meant to reflect the pure light of wisdom, unclouded by delusion. But Jinwul often felt more like a moon hidden behind perpetual clouds. For 8 years, he practiced with fierce dedication. He rose before dawn to sit in the meditation hall, his legs aching in lotus position, his back straight as a temple pillar. He studied sutras until the characters blurred on the page. He bowed 1,000 times each day until his forehead bore a permanent mark from touching the floor. He followed every rule, performed every ritual, and never once complained about the cold that seeped through the thin walls in winter or the hunger that came from eating only once a day. And yet he could not escape the voice in his head that told him it wasn't enough. This voice was not loud. It didn't shout or rage. Instead, it whispered with the patient persistence of water wearing down stone. When he sat in meditation, it would note how his mind wandered to thoughts of the breakfast he'd eaten, how his attention drifted to the sound of birds outside rather than resting on his breath. When he chanted sutras, it would remind him that his pronunciation of certain characters wasn't as pure as elder brother Sionho's. When he performed his temple duties, sweeping the courtyard, preparing meals, washing robes, it would observe that he sometimes felt resentment at the mundane tasks, that somewhere deep inside, he believed himself too intelligent for such simple work. The voice catalogued every imperfection, every moment of pride or laziness or doubt. And Jinwoo, believing that a true monk should have transcended such failings, felt ashamed of them all. He was 23 years old when the royal examination for monks was announced. This was a great honor, a chance to demonstrate mastery of Buddhist scripture and earn official recognition, perhaps even a position as chief monk at a prestigious temple or an advisory role at court. Master Zhonghui encouraged him to take the examination, and Jinwoo studied with renewed intensity, believing that, perhaps, if he could achieve this distinction, the voice of self-judgment might finally be satisfied. He passed the examination with high marks. Officials praised his knowledge of the sutras, his understanding of doctrine, his clear articulation of complex philosophical points. He was offered exactly what he had hoped for, a position at a well-funded temple in the capital, with private quarters and students of his own, with prestige and security and the respect of his peers. Jinwoo sat alone in the examination hall after the results were announced, feeling hollow as a cracked bell. The achievement felt like dust in his mouth, because passing the examination had not silenced the voice. If anything, it had grown louder. Now it observed how he felt a spark of pride at the official's praise, how part of him wanted to return to his home village so his parents could see what their son had become, how he had already begun imagining himself as someone important rather than simply as a monk trying to walk the Buddha's path. He understood, in that moment of uncomfortable clarity, that no external achievement would ever be enough. No matter how perfectly he performed, no matter how many people praised him, no matter how high he rose in the ranks of the monastic community, he would always find something in himself to criticize. The enemy was not out there, in the world of distractions and temptations. The enemy was the judge that lived inside his own head, the part of him that could never accept himself as he was. That evening, Jinwoo declined the position. He told the officials he needed more time for practice, that he was not yet ready for such responsibilities. They looked at him as if he were mad. Who turns down such an opportunity? But they could not force him to accept. He walked out of the capital carrying nothing but his bowl and his robes, and a question that had finally crystallized after years of struggling. What would it mean to stop fighting with himself? He made his way north to Bojesa Temple in Pyongyang, where he had heard there was a strong Seong community focused on meditation rather than scholarship. Perhaps, he thought, if he sat long enough in silence, he could find some peace with the parts of himself he had been trying so hard to eliminate. But at Bojesa, he found the same patterns repeating. During meditation retreats, he would notice how his posture wasn't quite as perfect as the monk sitting beside him. During meals, he would catch himself eating slightly faster than was dignified. During evening chanting, he would observe a moment of boredom and immediately condemn himself for it. The monastery was filled with sincere practitioners, but Jinwoo felt increasingly isolated, trapped inside a mind that could not stop cataloging its own failures. One night, unable to sleep, he walked out into the monastery courtyard. It was early autumn, and the air smelled of pine and approaching winter. Above him, the moon, his name Moon, hung bright and full, and he stood looking at it for a long time. The moon had dark patches across its face, seas of ancient rock that marked its surface, and yet people called it beautiful. No one expected the moon to be perfectly uniform. No one judged it for having shadows. Why, then, did he demand perfection from himself? The question arrived not as an insight, but as an exhaustion. He was so tired of the constant vigilance, the endless monitoring, the way every moment of his day was filtered through the lens of judgment. He thought of all the energy he had poured into trying to become someone worthy, and he wondered what would happen if he simply stopped. Not stopped practicing. Not stopped trying to live ethically or develop wisdom or cultivate compassion, but stopped treating himself as a project that needed to be perfected, as a problem that needed to be solved. In the morning, Jinwol gathered a few other monks who seemed similarly dissatisfied with the state of monastic life. He proposed something radical, creating a retreat community focused not on achieving status or demonstrating knowledge, but on developing samadhi and prajna, meditative concentration and wisdom through honest practice that acknowledged the messiness of actual human experience. The monks at Bojisa were not interested. They had their systems, their hierarchies, their ways of doing things. Jinwol's proposal sounded to them like an excuse for laxness, for abandoning discipline in favor of some vague idea about acceptance. So Jinwol traveled again, this time to Cheongwonsa Temple at Changpyeong, a smaller, quieter place where he hoped he might find space to explore this new question. He had no teacher to guide him. Master Jongui had died the previous year, and Jinwol had never formed a close relationship with any other master. Instead, he turned to the texts themselves, reading not to demonstrate knowledge, but to find practical guidance. It was in a text called the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch that he found the words that would change everything. The Patriarch said, "When we're deluded, there's a world to escape. When we're aware, there's nothing to pursue. From the beginning, not a single thing exists." Jinwol read these words over and over, sitting in the small room Cheongwonsa had given him, watching dust motes drift through afternoon light. From the beginning, not a single thing exists. Not even the self that he had been trying so hard to perfect. Not even the judge whose voice had tormented him for so long. The judge was a thought. The imperfections were thoughts. The whole struggle was happening inside a mind that was itself empty, not empty as in blank or meaningless, but empty as in not solid, not permanent, not ultimately real in the way he had been treating it. He sat with this realization for 3 days and 3 nights, barely moving. It wasn't a peaceful experience. It was more like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Every structure of self-understanding crumbling. The person he had thought he needed to become flickered and disappeared like smoke. And what remained was simpler than he had ever imagined. Just this moment, just this breath, just this awareness looking at itself without needing to improve anything. His first awakening, he would later call it, but it was not the end of the journey, because even after seeing through the illusion of a solid self, even after recognizing the emptiness of all phenomena, Jinwol discovered that old patterns don't simply vanish. The voice of judgment returned, though quieter now, more transparent. Moments of pride still arose. Irritation still flashed through him when temple routines disrupted his meditation. Self-doubt still whispered that perhaps the awakening hadn't been real, that he was fooling himself. The difference was that now he could see these patterns arising without believing they defined him. They were like weather moving through a vast sky, real in their appearance, but not who he was. He began to think of this ongoing work as herding an ox. In the old Zen stories, the ox represented the untamed mind, and the herder was the practitioner learning to work with it. But Jinwol realized the metaphor went deeper than that. The herder had to learn not just to control the ox, but to accept it to work with its nature rather than against it. to recognize that the ox's wildness and the herder's discipline were both necessary parts of the whole. He called himself Moguja in his private writings, the ox herder. It was a reminder that the work of practice was not about achieving some perfect state where all difficult emotions disappeared, but about developing a compassionate relationship with every part of his experience, including the parts he had spent years trying to eliminate. Years later, after more awakenings and more travels, after finally establishing the meditation and wisdom society he had envisioned, after becoming the teacher he had never imagined he could be, Jinwol, now known as Master Bojo, would write about this understanding. He would tell his students that sudden awakening was only the beginning, that seeing one's Buddha nature in a flash of insight didn't mean the work was complete. Even after you understand that your mind is already Buddha, he would write, the habit energies remain. They are grooves worn deep by years of conditioning. So we must cultivate, not because we lack something, but because recognition and integration are different processes. His students would sometimes complain that this teaching seemed contradictory. If they were already Buddha, why did they need to practice? If practice was necessary, didn't that mean they weren't yet enlightened? Bojo would smile at these questions, recognizing in them the same confusion he had carried for so many years. You are asking with a mind that wants to be finished, he would say, that wants to arrive at some final state where all struggle ends. But that very wanting is the struggle. He would point to the moon, his namesake moon, hanging in the daylight sky. The moon is always full, he would tell them. Even when we see only a crescent, the whole moon is there. Your Buddha nature is like this, complete from the beginning. But the shadows that hide it from your view don't disappear just because you've recognized the truth of the full moon. The shadows are also part of the truth. So, what do we do with the shadows? A student would inevitably ask. And Bojo would answer, we stop trying to cast them out. We invite them to tea. This phrase, inviting shadows to tea, became one of his most repeated teachings, though it confused many who first heard it. But Bojo knew from his own experience that the parts of ourselves we reject don't disappear. They don't dissolve in the light of awakening. They only go underground, where they grow stronger in the darkness of our denial. The path forward was not elimination, but integration. Not perfection, but wholeness. Not becoming someone new, but accepting who you had always been, flaws and virtues inseparably woven together like warp and weft in a single fabric. On his deathbed, 52 years old and exhausted from decades of teaching, Bojo called his closest students to him one final time. They expected final instructions, profound last words that would guide them after he was gone. Instead, he told them about a dream he'd had the night before. In the dream, he was young again, standing in the examination hall after passing the royal test, feeling that hollowness in his chest. But this time, instead of walking away from the achievement, he turned and embraced it, not with pride, but with compassion. He held that young monk who believed he was inadequate, who thought perfection was possible, who had not yet learned that his very imperfection was the doorway to awakening. I spent so many years, Bojo said, his voice barely a whisper now, trying to eliminate the parts of myself I judged as unworthy. And when I finally saw that all phenomena are empty, I thought that meant those parts didn't matter. But that wasn't the final teaching. His students leaned closer. The final teaching, Bojo continued, is that emptiness and form are not separate. Your anger is empty, and it is real. Your doubt is empty, and it is real. Your judgment of yourself is empty, and it causes real suffering. So you must hold all of it, the emptiness and the form. the awakening and the delusion, the Buddha nature and the habit energies with equal compassion. He closed his eyes, and his breathing slowed. Just before he died, he smiled, and one of the students swore they heard him whisper, "The ox and the herder were always one being." Tonight, as you rest here in the darkness, feel into the places where you judge yourself most harshly, the laziness you condemn, the selfishness you hide, the inadequacy you feel in your bones. These are not enemies to be defeated. They are parts of you that have been exiled, that are asking to come home. What would it mean to invite them in, not to indulge them or let them control you, but simply to acknowledge them without adding the second arrow of judgment? To say, "I see you." Self-doubt. "I see you." Shame. "I see you." Fear of not being enough. Come. Sit with me. You don't have to hide anymore. Your breath moves through you without judgment, accepting every part. In and out, rising and falling. The moon of your awareness shines on everything equally, shadows and light, both reflected in the same still water. Let your body soften where it holds tension. Let your jaw unclench. Let the weight of perfectionism slide off your shoulders like a robe you no longer need to wear. You are the ox and the herder. You are the judge and the judged. You are the struggle and the peace that comes from stopping the struggle. And in this moment, just as you are, flawed and questioning and tired, you are already whole. You are already whole. The mountain monasteries of Korea still stand, their meditation halls filled with monks and nuns sitting in silence, working with their own inner judges, their own impossible standards. And somewhere in that silence, Bojo's teaching continues that the path is not about becoming perfect, but about befriending every imperfect part, about gathering all the scattered pieces and discovering they were never truly scattered at all. We journey on now, carrying this understanding into new territory, where other teachers found this same wisdom wearing different names, in a village near Hue in central Vietnam, during a time when the Perfume River ran clear and French colonial buildings cast long shadows over morning markets. There lived a young woman named Lien, who believed she had been given the wrong life. Her father was the gardener at a Buddhist temple called Tien Mu, perched on a hill overlooking the river, its seven-tiered pagoda visible from anywhere in the valley. From the time Lien could walk, she had followed her father through the temple grounds, watching him tend lotus ponds, prune the Bodhi trees, sweep fallen frangipani blossoms from stone paths. The monks would nod to them as they passed, their saffron robes bright against morning mist. Lien's mother had died when she was 3, too young to remember her face, old enough to feel the absence like a hollow in her chest. Her father never remarried. Instead, he poured his grief into the garden, and his daughter grew up surrounded by beauty he had cultivated from pain. By the time she was 19, Lien could identify every plant on the temple grounds by smell alone. She knew which soil the jasmine preferred, when to harvest lemongrass, how to coax orchids into bloom. But she did not want to be a gardener. She wanted to be a teacher, like her mother had been. She wanted to stand in front of students in clean clothes that didn't smell of earth and compost. I wanted to live in the city where electric lights burned late into the night. I wanted to escape the cycles of planting and weeding and harvesting that defined her father's days. Most of all, she wanted to escape the shadow of her own sadness, a heaviness that had lived in her chest for as long as she could remember, that made even the temple's beauty feel like a burden. The monks spoke of peace and enlightenment, but Lien felt neither. She felt trapped, resentful, and ashamed of her resentment. One morning in early spring, her father asked her to help him prepare the lotus pond for the growing season. The water had grown stagnant over winter, thick with decomposed leaves and algae. The mud at the bottom, black and foul-smelling. Other girls her age were in school or working in shops. And here she was, knee-deep in muck, pulling out rotting vegetation while her father worked silently beside her. "I hate this," she said, not looking at him. "I hate the mud. I hate the smell. I hate that this is all my life will ever be." Her father straightened, water dripping from his hands. He was 47 but looked older, his face lined from years of outdoor work. "You think the lotus hates the mud?" he asked quietly. "The lotus doesn't have a choice." Lien snapped. "Neither do we," her father said. "But that doesn't mean we have to make it harder than it is." She wanted to argue, but he had already returned to his work, his weathered hands gentle as he cleared space for new growth. Lien stood there in the murky water, feeling tears mix with the sweat on her face, hating herself for crying, hating the mud, hating the way her father accepted everything with such infuriating calm. That afternoon, one of the senior monks, Thay Min, who had taught her to read when she was small, found her sitting alone under the frangipani tree, still smelling of pond water despite having washed 3 times. "Your father tells me you're unhappy," he said, lowering himself to sit beside her with the care of someone whose knees no longer bent easily. Lien said nothing. "May I tell you a story?" Thay Min asked. She shrugged, which he took as permission. "When I was young, younger than you, I had a terribly temper. Small things would send me into rages, a cup broken, a word spoken carelessly, any slight, whether real or imagined. My anger was like a wild animal I carried inside me, and I was terrified of it. So I came to the monastery, hoping the monks could teach me to eliminate it, to cut it out like a surgeon removing a tumor." He paused, watching a dragonfly hover over the nearby pond, the same pond Lien had been cleaning that morning. "But my teacher, a very old master who had lived through war and occupation and loss, told me something I didn't want to hear. He said, 'Your anger is not separate from you. It grew from the same soil that grew your capacity for joy, for protection, for passion. If you try to eliminate it, you will become less than whole. The path is not elimination but transformation.'" Lien turned to look at him. "How do you transform anger?" "The same way you transform mud into lotus," Thay Min said, gesturing toward the pond. "You don't pretend the mud isn't there. You don't try to separate the lotus from the conditions that grew it. You recognize that one cannot exist without the other." "That's just words," Lien said, hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "Pretty philosophy that doesn't change anything." "You're right," Thay Min said, surprising her. "Words alone change nothing, but practice changes everything." He stood slowly, his knees cracking. "Come with me tomorrow morning, early, before the temple wakes. I'll show you what I mean." The next morning, while darkness still held the edges of the sky and the air was cool enough to raise goosebumps on her arms, Lien met Thay Min at the lotus pond. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the last stars. Her father's work from yesterday had begun to show results already. The mud had settled. The water was clearer. "Sit," Thay Min said, and they both sat on the stone edge of the pond, their feet just above the water. "Now breathe with me. In and out. In and out. Lien breathed, feeling foolish, waiting for whatever lesson this was supposed to teach. Notice what you're feeling right now, Thai Min said. Don't judge it. Don't try to change it. Just notice. Lien closed her eyes and noticed. She felt tired from waking so early, felt irritated at sitting still when there was work to be done, felt the familiar heaviness in her chest. That shadow sadness she had carried for so long she no longer knew what had caused it. Felt resentment toward her father for being content with so little, toward her mother for dying and leaving her, toward herself for being unable to be grateful for what she had. Now, Thai Min said softly, instead of pushing those feelings away or judging yourself for having them, what if you said, hello, sadness. I see you. Hello, resentment. I see you. Hello, grief I've never named. I see you. Something shifted in Lien's chest. Not dramatically, there was no sudden light, no moment of transcendence. But saying hello to her sadness, instead of fighting, it felt like setting down a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The sadness was still there, but somehow it felt less solid, less permanent. They sat for an hour, breathing, watching the sky lighten and the pond's surface shift from black to silver to gold. Thai Min didn't speak again, and Lien didn't need him to. She was beginning to understand what he meant about transformation, not as making the difficult feelings disappear, but as changing her relationship to them. When the temple bells rang for morning prayers, Thai Min rose to leave. Come back tomorrow if you wish, he said. And the day after, and the day after that. This is not a practice you do once. It is a practice you return to, again and again, until it becomes the way you meet everything. For the next 3 months, Lien came to the pond every morning before dawn. At first, she came out of curiosity, then out of habit, then out of something she couldn't quite name, a hunger for the peace she occasionally touched in those quiet hours. Thai Min didn't always join her, but his presence lingered in the practice he had taught her, to notice without judging, to greet her difficult feelings like visitors rather than enemies, to breathe through discomfort instead of running from it. And slowly, incrementally, something in her began to change. She started to notice that her sadness came in waves, some days heavy as monsoon rain, some days barely a whisper. On the heavy days, instead of berating herself for being ungrateful or weak, she would breathe and say, hello, sadness. You're here again. You're welcome to sit with me. And somehow, acknowledged rather than fought, the sadness would settle more quickly, like sediment sinking to the bottom of still water. She noticed that her resentment toward her father had roots that went deeper than his choice to be a gardener. It grew from her grief about her mother, from her fear that she would end up alone like him, from her terror that accepting his life meant giving up on her own dreams. Once she could see these roots clearly, her resentment began to soften. She could see her father not as an obstacle to her future, but as a man who had transformed his own unbearable grief into something that brought beauty to the world. One morning in late spring, Lien was sitting by the pond when she noticed the first lotus bud breaking the surface of the water. She watched it rise from the mud her father had so carefully prepared, its tightly closed petals still covered in a thin film of pond water. In a few days, it would open into something transcendently beautiful. But right now, it was awkward, closed, emerging from darkness into light. She thought about how much energy she had spent wishing she was somewhere else, someone else. how she had treated her sadness and resentment and grief as evidence of her failure, as obstacles to the happy, successful life she thought she deserved. But what if those difficult feelings were more like the mud, not pleasant, not something to celebrate, but absolutely necessary for growth? What if her sadness was teaching her about the depth of her capacity to love? What if her resentment was showing her where she needed boundaries, where she needed to honor her own desires? What if her grief was the very thing that would make her a compassionate teacher one day? Someone who could recognize pain in her students because she had learned to recognize it in herself? That afternoon, Lien found her father in the vegetable garden behind the temple kitchen, his hands dark with soil, transplanting seedlings. She knelt beside him, not speaking at first, just helping him make holes in the prepared earth, gently settling roots into place. "I'm sorry," she finally said, "for saying I hated this." Her father glanced at her, then back at his work. "You weren't wrong to hate it," he said. "The mud is genuinely unpleasant. The work is hard. And this life," he gestured around them, "is not what you would have chosen. But you chose it," Lien said. "After your mother died," her father said slowly, choosing his words with care, "I thought I would drown in the grief. It felt bottomless. I would wake up every morning and the first thing I felt was the absence of her. And I wanted to die too." He pressed soil gently around a seedling, his movements tender despite his rough hands. "The abbot of this temple told me something I've never forgotten. He said, 'Grief is love that has nowhere to go. So give it somewhere to go.'" He looked at Lien directly now. "The garden became where my love could go. Every plant I tended was a prayer for her. Every morning I spent in beauty was my way of honoring what she had loved about the world." And slowly, so slowly, I didn't notice it happening, the grief transformed. It didn't disappear, but it became something I could carry, something that fed my life instead of consuming it. Lien felt tears spill over, and this time she didn't wipe them away. "I have so much grief too," she whispered, "and I don't even know why. She died so long ago. I barely remember her. Why am I still so sad? Because you lost her," her father said simply, "and because you saw how it broke me, and you were frightened. And because you've been carrying that grief alone, thinking you shouldn't feel it." He reached over and touched her cheek, his hand leaving a smudge of earth. "But grief is not something to be ashamed of, Kongai. It's proof that you loved, that you still love. Let it teach you." They worked together in silence after that, planting seedlings that would grow into vegetables that would feed the monks, that would in turn tend the gardens, in the endless cycle of nourishment and care that kept the temple alive. That summer, the lotus Lien had watched emerge from mud opened into the most perfect bloom the pond had seen in years. It was photographed by visitors, praised by monks, and Lien's father smiled quietly, knowing it had grown from the darkest, most carefully tended mud. By the time autumn came, Lien had made a decision. She would stay at the temple for one more year, learning everything her father could teach her about gardening, about transforming grief into beauty. And then she would go to the city and become a teacher, carrying with her the understanding that no one, not her students, not herself, needed to eliminate their difficulties to be worthy of love and respect. They only needed to learn what she had learned, how to meet their mud with compassion, how to trust that lotus blooms were always possible, even in the darkest water. The morning she left for the city, Min gave her a small glazed pot containing a lotus seed. "Plant it wherever you go," he said. Remember that you carry the mud and the lotus both. You cannot have one without the other. This is not a burden. This is wholeness. Years later, Lian would become the teacher she had dreamed of being. She would stand in front of students, many of them struggling, sad, convinced they were failing, and she would tell them about the lotus pond, about greeting their difficult feelings instead of fighting them, about how the mud they were sitting in might be preparing them for blooms they couldn't yet imagine. And in her small apartment in the city, she would tend a lotus pond she had built in a large ceramic basin. Every year, she would clean out the winter's accumulated mud, her hands dark with the work. And every spring, she would watch new blooms emerge from that darkness. And she would remember what her father and Thay Min had taught her, that transformation is not about eliminating what is difficult, but about learning to work with it, to let it feed your growth rather than poison your roots. The lotus doesn't reject the mud. It uses it. It transforms it. It proves that beauty and difficulty are not opposites, but partners in the sacred work of becoming whole. Your breath moves through you now, like water through lotus roots, carrying nutrients from dark soil toward light. Feel where you hold tension, where you resist the difficulties you carry. What would it mean to say hello to those places? Not to fix them or transcend them, but simply to acknowledge, yes, this too is part of me. This too has something to teach. The mud is not your enemy. It is the condition of your blooming. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath deepen. Let the wisdom of the lotus remind you that you don't have to wait until all your difficulties are resolved to begin opening toward light. You bloom from the mud, not despite it. We continue now to other teachers, other landscapes, but the same truth waiting to be discovered in different forms. In 16th century Kyoto, during the time when warlords fought for control of a fractured nation and tea ceremonies had become displays of wealth as much as spirituality, there lived a young potter's apprentice named Kiyoshi who could not bear to make mistakes. His master, an old man named Tanaka, whose hands shook so badly he could no longer throw pots himself, would watch Kiyoshi work from his seat by the kiln and shake his head at what he saw. Not at the quality of the work. Kiyoshi's bowls were technically flawless, his proportions perfect, his glazes applied with mathematical precision. The old master shook his head at something else entirely. "You throw pots like a man building a prison," Tanaka said one afternoon, watching Kiyoshi destroy yet another tea bowl because a slight asymmetry in the rim offended his eye. "A tea bowl should be perfect," Kiyoshi replied, not looking up from his work. "How can someone find peace drinking from a flawed vessel? How can someone find peace in anything?" Tanaka countered, "If they cannot accept that flaws are woven into the fabric of existence itself." But Kiyoshi didn't listen. He was 22 years old and certain that excellence was a matter of eliminating error. That mastery meant never allowing imperfection to pass his hands. He would work late into the night, destroying 3 bowls for every one he deemed acceptable. His standards so high that even his acceptable pieces felt like failures to him. This inability to accept imperfection extended beyond his pottery. Kiyoshi judged his every word, his every gesture, finding himself inadequate in ways both large and small. He berated himself for stumbling over a phrase in conversation, for laughing too loudly at a joke, for feeling attraction to the merchant's daughter who sometimes delivered clay to the workshop. Each human messiness felt like evidence of a fundamental defect in his character. He sought perfection because he believed it would finally make him acceptable to others, to himself, to the universe that seemed to demand flawlessness as the price of peace. One spring morning, a letter arrived at the workshop that would change everything. It was an invitation, or perhaps a summons from Sen no Rikyu, the tea master who served the great warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Rikyu had heard of Tanaka's workshop and requested tea bowls for an important ceremony. The letter specified that he wanted pieces in the wabi style. Simple, rustic, imperfect. Tanaka read the letter and smiled. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Kiyoshi. "For me?" Kiyoshi's hands trembled as he held the paper. An invitation from Rikyu was like being noticed by a god. "But master, you should. My hands shake too much for throwing now," Tanaka interrupted. "And besides, you need this. You need to learn what Rikyu knows." "What does he know?" "That perfection is a trap," Tanaka said. "And that freedom lives in accepting what you have spent your whole life trying to eliminate." Kiyoshi didn't understand, but he accepted the commission. For 3 weeks, he worked obsessively, trying to make bowls that looked rustic and simple while still maintaining the hidden perfection he believed was essential. He wanted them to appear imperfect while being secretly flawless, a controlled simulation of naturalness. Every bowl he made felt wrong. Too studied, too self-conscious. He could see his striving in every curve, his fear in every deliberately irregular rim. They looked like someone trying very hard to appear casual, and the effect was worse than his usual precise work. On the night before, he was to deliver the bowls to Rikyu's tea house. Kiyoshi sat alone in the workshop, surrounded by failed attempts, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came when he confronted his own inadequacy. He had 1 day left and nothing worthy to present. In frustration, he threw a bowl on the wheel without thinking, without measuring, without the careful attention he usually brought to his work. His hands moved from muscle memory rather than conscious control, and the bowl that emerged was lopsided, rough, its walls uneven. It was, by every technical standard he had been taught, a failure. He should have destroyed it. Instead, exhausted and defeated, he set it aside and fell asleep on the workshop floor. He woke before dawn to find Master Tanaka examining the bowl in the grey morning light. "This one," Tanaka said. "Take this one to Rikyu." "That one?" Kiyoshi looked at the crude bowl with horror. "Master, that's the worst thing I've made in years. I threw it without even thinking." "I know," Tanaka said, still turning the bowl in his trembling hands. "That's why it's the only honest thing you've created in months. All your other bowls lie. They pretend. This one tells the truth." "What truth?" "That the potter's hands shake. That the clay resists. That nothing in nature grows in perfectly symmetrical lines. That beauty emerges from conditions, not despite them." Tanaka set the bowl down gently. "Rikyu will understand." So Kiyoshi, with tremendous reluctance and a sense that he was about to be humiliated, wrapped the crude bowl carefully and traveled to Rikyu's tea house on the outskirts of the city. The tea house was smaller than he expected, barely large enough for 4 people to sit. Its entrance so low that visitors had to bow deeply just to enter. Inside, the walls were plain mud plaster, the floor bare wood. A single scroll hung in the alcove, and beneath it a simple arrangement, 1 white camellia in a rough bamboo vase. Rikyu himself was a small man with an unremarkable face, wearing a plain grey robe. Nothing about him suggested the power he wielded, the influence he had over the most dangerous warlord in Japan. He looked like a retired clerk, not a master who had transformed the tea ceremony from aristocratic display into spiritual practice. "You've brought a bowl," Rikyu said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the small space. Kiyoshi unwrapped it with shaking hands, feeling shame flood through him as he presented his failure to this master. I apologize for this bowl. It's not what you deserve. I tried to make something better, but I failed. And stop, Rikyu said gently. He took the bowl and held it up to the light, filtering through the paper screens. He turned it slowly, examining every imperfection. Then he did something Kiyoshi didn't expect. He smiled. This is exactly what I hoped for. May I ask, how did you make it? Without thinking, Kiyoshi admitted. I was frustrated and tired, and I just let my hands do what they wanted. Yes, Rikyu said. I can see that. Do you know what makes this bowl beautiful? Kiyoshi looked at the crude vessel and saw only its flaws. I don't see anything beautiful in it. Then let me show you, Rikyu said. Sit. They sat together on the floor, the bowl between them. Rikyu prepared tea with movements so practiced they seemed effortless. And when he poured water into the bowl, Kiyoshi's imperfect bowl, the green matcha swirled within it like moss on ancient stone. Look at how the glaze broke here, Rikyu said, pointing to a spot where the glaze had pulled away from the clay during firing. See this irregular color? This happened because you couldn't control the kiln's temperature perfectly. A technician would call this a defect, but I call it the fingerprint of fire. Proof that this bowl was born from genuine conditions rather than manufactured control. He traced the uneven rim, and this you tried to center the clay perfectly. Yes, but the clay had its own density, its own memory of how it wanted to move. So the rim wobbles slightly. This means that when someone drinks from this bowl, their lips meet a different curve with each sip. The experience is alive, changing, never quite predictable. How could perfect symmetry compete with that? Kiyoshi stared at the bowl, seeing it as if for the first time. Here's what you don't yet understand, Rikyu continued, lifting the bowl and cradling it in both hands. You've been trying to make bowls that transcend their clayness, their firedness, their human-madeness. You want them to be so perfect they could have been imagined by gods. But the divine is not found in perfection. It's found in complete acceptance of what is. I don't understand, Kiyoshi whispered. Rikyu set the bowl down between them. You judge yourself harshly. Yes? You believe you must eliminate your flaws to be worthy? Kiyoshi felt exposed, as if this stranger had looked directly into his heart. He nodded. This is the great trap, Rikyu said. The belief that we must become something other than what we are to deserve peace, love, respect. So we go to war with ourselves. We notice every imperfection and treat it as an enemy. We exhaust ourselves trying to control things that cannot be controlled, the wobble of our hands, the temperature of the kiln, the way clay remembers its own origins. And in this war, we lose touch with the only thing that is real, this moment, exactly as it is. He picked up the bowl again, his thumb resting gently on the spot where the glaze had broken. Do you know what the aristocrats were doing before I simplified the tea ceremony? They were competing to own the most expensive Chinese bowls, the most perfect specimens. The tea ceremony had become theater of wealth, each host trying to display superior taste and resources. The actual tea, the actual experience of presence, of impermanence, of shared humanity had been lost. So you changed it, Kiyoshi said. I stripped it down, Rikyu corrected. I asked, what is essential, not what is impressive. not what demonstrates mastery, but what is true. And I discovered that truth lives in imperfection. The crack in the bowl is where the light gets in. The asymmetry is where the uniqueness lives. The roughness is where you can feel the potter's actual hands, not some idealized version of hands. He passed the bowl to Kiyoshi. Hold it. Feel its weight. Kiyoshi held the bowl he had made in shame, and for the first time, he really felt it. The weight was honest, neither too heavy nor too light. The texture under his fingertips spoke of the wheels turning, of his hand's pressure, of the clay's response. This bowl was not pretending to be anything other than what it was: earth, shaped by imperfect human hands, transformed by uncontrollable fire, marked by the reality of its making. The word we use is wabi-sabi. Rikyu said, "Wabi, the fullness found in simplicity, the beauty of humble things. Sabi, the quality that comes from age and wear, the deepening that happens when we accept transience." Together, they describe a way of seeing that recognizes nothing is finished, nothing is perfect, nothing lasts. And this is not tragic. This is the condition of being alive. Kiyoshi felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening onto a room he hadn't known existed. "Let me tell you a story," Rikyu said. "When I was young and studying with my own master, Daikanojo, I was much like you, obsessed with correctness, terrified of error. My master asked me to prepare his garden for a tea gathering. I worked for hours, raking every stone, removing every fallen leaf, creating perfect patterns in the gravel. Just before I called him to inspect it, I shook a cherry tree and let a few blossoms fall across my perfect work." "Why?" Kiyoshi asked. "Because perfection is death," Rikyu said simply. "Life is messy, contingent, always in process. The scattered blossoms returned my sterile garden to the realm of the living. They acknowledge that beauty is not about control, but about harmony with conditions as they are." He stood slowly, his knees creaking, an old man's body making old man sounds, not hiding its age. "Here is what I want you to understand. The parts of yourself that you judge most harshly, the flaws you spend your energy trying to eliminate, they are not obstacles to your wholeness. They are evidence of your wholeness. The wobble in your hand that makes the rim uneven, that's your humanity showing through. The impatience that makes you rush and create unexpected textures, that's your vitality expressing itself. The self-doubt that whispers you're not good enough, that's your conscience, asking you to stay humble and keep learning. But if I accept my flaws," Kiyoshi said, "won't I just become lazy? Won't I stop improving? There is a difference." Rikyu said, "Between accepting reality and abandoning effort, you can work diligently to refine your craft while simultaneously accepting that the result will never be perfect. That the goal is not to eliminate your humanity, but to express it more honestly. This is not laziness. This is wisdom." He placed his hand on Kiyoshi's shoulder. "You make beautiful bowls, technically excellent, but they're empty of you. They show me a person trying to disappear behind technique. This bowl," he gestured to the crude tea bowl, "this bowl is full of you. I can see your frustration in it, your exhaustion, your moment of surrender. And that makes it precious." Kiyoshi left Rikyu's tea house that afternoon, carrying the bowl that he had brought as a shameful failure. Rikyu had filled it with gold coins, payment far exceeding what such a crude piece should command, and had requested 20 more bowls made without thinking, shaped by tired hands, marked by whatever the fire decides to do. But more than the commission, Kiyoshi carried a question that would reshape his understanding of everything. What if the parts of himself he had been trying to eliminate were exactly what made him human? What if his perceived flaws were actually features, necessary elements of his particular expression of being alive? Over the following months, Kiyoshi began practicing a new way of working. Instead of destroying every piece that didn't meet his impossible standards, he learned to ask, "What is this bowl teaching me? What truth is it telling that a technically perfect bowl cannot tell?" He found that the bowls he made when distracted had a looseness that his focused pieces lacked. The bowls made from inferior clay often had color variations that his carefully selected materials never produced. The bowls fired when the kiln ran hot developed textures that his carefully controlled firings could never achieve. And slowly, painfully slowly, he began to extend this acceptance from his pottery to his life. When he stumbled over words, he noticed how the people around him softened with relief. Finally, this person who seemed so controlled was showing himself to be human like them. When he laughed too loud, he recognized that joy deserved to be loud sometimes. When he felt attracted to the merchant's daughter, he stopped treating it as a shameful weakness and recognized it as life calling to life. The change was not dramatic. There was no sudden enlightenment. But gradually, the tightness in his chest loosened. The constant voice of self-judgment grew quieter. He began to feel less like a person trying to meet impossible standards and more like a person simply living, making pots, being imperfect and alive and present. Years later, after Rikyu's tragic death at Hideyoshi's order, a death that showed how even the greatest masters cannot control the outcomes of their lives, Kiyoshi would become a respected potter in his own right. People would seek his bowls not because they were technically perfect, but because they were honestly made, carrying the evidence of human hands. Unpredictable fire, the dance between control and surrender that defines all creative work. And he would tell his own students what Rikyu had taught him, that the crack is not the flaw, but the opening, that the wobble is not the mistake, but the signature of authentic engagement with materials and moment, that wabi-sabi is not a technique to master, but a way of seeing that recognizes beauty in imperfection, presence in impermanence, wholeness in incompleteness. Master Tanaka lived long enough to see Kiyoshi's transformation. On his deathbed, the old man held one of Kiyoshi's bowls, deliberately asymmetric, rough-textured, marked by the fire's whims, and whispered, "Now you understand. The prison you were building was made of perfection. Freedom is found in accepting the wobble. Tonight, you lie here with your own imperfections, your own failures and flaws that you've been taught to hide or fix or judge. What if they're not obstacles? What if they're the cracks where your particular light shines through? Feel your breath moving imperfectly, never quite the same depth twice. Feel your body held by blankets and mattress, neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, just exactly as it is. The tea bowl of your life will never be perfect. It will always carry marks of where you rushed, where you hesitated, where conditions you couldn't control shaped the outcome. And that is what makes it yours. That is what makes it real. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let the demand for perfection slide away like rain off a clay bowl. You are already whole, already complete, already enough, not despite your imperfections, but including them, expressed through them, made more beautifully human by them. Wabi-sabi, the rough, the aged, the incomplete, the impermanent, all of it sacred, all of it welcome, all of it proof that you are alive. We journey on now, deeper into the night, where other teachers wait with other mirrors for seeing ourselves truly, In 8th century China, during what would later be called the Golden Age of Chan Buddhism, there lived a monk named Yuan Ming who carried a secret shame that gnawed at him like rats in the walls of his small meditation hut. He had come to the monastery at Hongzhou in Jiangxi province with the highest intentions. At 25 years old, he had left behind a successful life as a minor government official, a life of comfort, status, social connections, because he'd read portions of the Diamond Sutra and felt something crack open inside him. The words "dwelling nowhere, let the mind come forth," had struck him like a bell, and suddenly his comfortable life felt like a prison of his own making. So he'd walked away from everything, shaved his head, donned rough robes, and traveled to study with Master Mazu Dao Yi, the teacher everyone whispered about. They said Mazu was different from other masters. They said he shouted at students, sometimes hit them, asked impossible questions, and taught that enlightenment wasn't something to achieve but something you were already living. If only you could stop trying so hard to find it. Yuan Ming arrived at the monastery with his heart full of devotion and his mind full of spiritual ambition. He would be the most dedicated student. He would sit in meditation longer than anyone else. He would memorize sutras, perform the most menial tasks with perfect mindfulness. And surely Master Mazu would notice his exceptional commitment and offer him a personal teaching, a koan perhaps, that would crack open his mind and reveal the truth he was seeking. But things didn't unfold that way. The problem, the secret shame that Yuan Ming couldn't tell anyone, was that he was desperately, consumingly jealous of another monk named Fa Wu. Fa Wu had arrived at the monastery the same week as Yuan Ming. They were the same age, had similar backgrounds, and at first Yuan Ming had been glad to have a companion on the path. But within months, it became clear that Fa Wu possessed something Yuan Ming lacked, an easy, natural relationship with the practice. While Yuan Ming sat in meditation, fighting his wandering thoughts like a man trying to hold back floodwaters with his bare hands, Fa Wu seemed to settle into stillness without effort. While Yuan Ming studied sutras late into the night, memorizing passages with grim determination, Fa Wu casually quoted teachings in conversation as if they'd simply absorbed into him through his skin. While Yuan Ming performed his work assignments with careful mindfulness, sweeping the courtyard, hauling water, cleaning meditation halls, Fa Wu simply worked, humming sometimes, stopping to watch birds, completely unself-conscious. Worse, Master Mazu seemed to favor Fa Wu. He would stop to talk with him in the courtyard, laugh at something Fa Wu said, clap him on the shoulder. In the Dharma hall, when Mazu gave teachings, his eyes would often rest on Fa Wu with a look that seemed to say, "Yes, this one understands." Yuan Ming told himself he shouldn't care. Jealousy was a defilement, a klesha, one of the poisons that bound beings to suffering. A true practitioner should be happy for another's progress, should see all monks as brothers on the path. But knowing this only made the jealousy worse, because now he was not just jealous, but ashamed of being jealous, and angry at himself for being ashamed, creating a spiral of self-judgment that left him exhausted. He tried to hide it. He smiled at Fa Wu, spoke kindly to him, even went out of his way to help him with tasks. But inside, he was corroding. Every time Mazu praised Fa Wu's insight, Yuan Ming felt something twist in his chest. Every time another monk commented on how naturally Fa Wu embodied the teachings, Yuan Ming felt himself shrinking, becoming harder and more bitter. At night, lying on his wooden sleeping platform, Yuan Ming would bargain with himself. Tomorrow I'll try harder. Tomorrow I'll be better. Tomorrow I'll finally let go of this jealousy and become the practitioner I'm supposed to be. But tomorrow always brought more of the same, more striving, more comparison, more secret shame. 3 years into his time at the monastery, something happened that brought everything to a crisis. Master Mazu announced that he would accept 3 monks as formal Dharma students, authorizing them to teach in his lineage. The entire community understood what this meant. These 3 would be recognized as having penetrated the essential teaching, as embodying the realization that Mazu pointed to when he said, "Ordinary mind is the way." Everyone knew Fa Wu would be chosen. He was 28 now, radiating a quality of presence that even Yuan Ming, in his jealousy, had to acknowledge. Fa Wu had stopped trying to be spiritual and had somehow, mysteriously, become authentic instead. The ceremony was held on an autumn morning when the leaves were turning and the air smelled of wood smoke from the kitchen fires. The entire community gathered in the main hall. Mazu, now 79 years old and walking with difficulty, stood before the Buddha statue while the 3 chosen monks knelt before him. Fa Wu was the first name called. Yuan Ming stood at the back of the hall, his hands folded properly in his robes, his face composed in an expression of serene happiness. Inside, he was crumbling. The jealousy rose like bile, mixed with a grief so profound he could barely breathe. 4 years of practice, and he had only become more trapped, more divided against himself, more fundamentally inadequate. After the ceremony, Yuan Ming walked to the edge of the monastery grounds and sat beneath a persimmon tree heavy with orange fruit. He felt completely lost. All his striving had led nowhere. He was still the same small, jealous, inadequate person he'd been when he arrived. Maybe worse, because now he was a small, jealous, inadequate person who had failed at becoming enlightened. That's where Mazu found him an hour later. The old master lowered himself to the ground with a grunt of effort, settling beside Yuan Ming under the persimmon tree. For a long time, he said nothing, just sat there, breathing audibly, looking out at the hills beyond the monastery. Finally, Mazu spoke. "You're suffering." It wasn't a question. Yuan Ming felt tears spring to his eyes, the first genuine emotion he'd allowed himself to feel without trying to fix it or hide it in months. "Yes," he whispered. "Tell me," Mazu said. And somehow, perhaps because he had nothing left to lose, Yuan Ming told him everything. The jealousy, the shame, the years of trying to become someone worthy, someone different, someone not jealous, the exhaustion of maintaining the pretense that he was a good monk, a proper practitioner, while inside he was rotting with envy and self-hatred. When he finished, he couldn't look at Mazu. He waited for judgment, for disappointment, for the master to tell him he needed to try harder, or perhaps that he wasn't suited for monastic life. Instead, Mazu laughed a deep, rumbling sound like distant thunder. "Yuan Ming," the master said, "do you know what ordinary mind is? The sutras say it's our true nature." Yuan Ming replied automatically, "Buddha nature. The enlightened mind we already possess. That's what the sutras say." Mazu agreed. "But what is it actually?" Yuan Ming didn't know how to answer. "It's this," Mazu said, gesturing at Yuan Ming. "Right now, this jealous, ashamed, exhausted, honest mind. This is ordinary mind." Yuan Ming stared at him. "But jealousy is a defilement. It's what I need to get rid of to become what?" Mazu interrupted. "To become ordinary, You already are. To become enlightened, you already are. The problem is not the jealousy. The problem is that you've been treating your mind like an enemy territory that needs to be conquered. The old master picked up a fallen persimmon, turned it in his gnarled hands. You know why I chose Fa Wu today? Yuan Ming's chest tightened, but he nodded. Because he stopped fighting himself, Ma Zu said. Not because he became perfect, not because he eliminated all his difficulties, but because he finally accepted that walking, talking, eating, sleeping, sometimes being jealous, sometimes being generous, sometimes being confused, this is the way. There is no other way than this actual mind, exactly as it is. But then what's the point of practice? Yuan Ming asked. And the question came out more desperate than he intended. The point of practice, Ma Zu said, is to stop dividing yourself into the person you are and the person you think you should be. You have spent 4 years going to war with jealousy. Has it disappeared? No, Yuan Ming admitted. It's gotten worse. Of course it has, Ma Zu said. Because you can't fight what you are. Jealousy arose. It's here. It's a condition, like rain or hunger or the color of these persimmons. When you resist it, judge it, try to eliminate it, you create suffering on top of suffering. The original jealousy plus the shame of being jealous, plus the anger at being ashamed, plus the exhaustion from fighting it all. He set the persimmon down carefully. But when you simply acknowledge, yes, jealousy is here, something shifts. Not because the jealousy disappears, but because you stop adding the second arrow. Second arrow? Yuan Ming echoed. An old teaching, Ma Zu said. When an arrow hits you, that's pain. When you shoot yourself with a second arrow, why did this happen to me? What's wrong with me for feeling this? That's suffering. You've been shooting yourself with second arrows for 4 years. A bird landed in the persimmon tree above them, pecked at a fruit, flew away. The simplicity of it, hunger, eating, flying struck Yuan Ming as almost unbearably beautiful. So I should just accept being jealous, he asked. I'm not saying you should do anything, Ma Zu said. I'm saying, right now, jealousy is here. Right now, shame about jealousy is here. Right now, exhaustion is here. Right now, this conversation is here. Right now, this ground beneath you is here. All of it is ordinary mind. All of it is the way. Not because it's special or holy, but because it's what's actually happening. He struggled to his feet, joints popping. When you see Fa Wu tomorrow, you'll probably still feel jealous. That's fine. Feel it. Don't pretend you don't. Don't add shame to it. Don't make it mean something about your worth. Just notice, jealousy. Like noticing, hunger, cold wind, bird song. And then, Yuan Ming asked, then you sweep the courtyard, or eat breakfast, or sit in meditation, Ma Zu said. Whatever needs doing. The jealousy might stay, or it might go. That's not the point. The point is, you stop treating your actual present mind as an obstacle to some other, better, more spiritual mind. There is no other mind. This is it. Ordinary mind is the way. He started to walk back toward the monastery, then paused. You know what's extraordinary about ordinary mind? Yuan Ming shook his head. Nothing, Ma Zu said, and laughed again. Absolutely nothing. That's the whole point. After the master left, Yuanming sat under the persimmon tree as the afternoon light turned golden. Then amber. Then grey. He felt the jealousy still present in his chest. It hadn't magically dissolved, but something had shifted. He wasn't fighting it anymore. He was just sitting with it, letting it be there like the breeze was there, like the darkening sky was there. And in that allowing, something loosened. Not the jealousy itself, but his relationship to it. He could feel it without being consumed by it. He could notice it without it defining him. It was just a feeling, arising and changing, part of the weather of his mind. Over the following weeks and months, the jealousy did begin to fade, not because Yuanming fought it, but because he stopped feeding it with resistance and shame. When it arose, he would notice it. Ah, jealousy. And then he would go about his day. Sometimes the noticing itself was enough. Sometimes the jealousy would stay for hours or days. But it no longer felt like evidence of his fundamental unworthiness. It was just one of many things his mind did, like thinking about lunch, or remembering his childhood, or noticing beauty. He began to see that Mazu had been right. Fawu wasn't perfect. Fawu got frustrated sometimes, complained about the cold, forgot things, laughed too loudly, could be thoughtless. Fawu was just Fawu, a regular human being who had stopped pretending to be anything else. And Yuanming was just Yuanming, a regular human being who was learning, slowly, to stop pretending too. 7 years after that conversation under the persimmon tree, Mazu died at age 80. The entire community gathered for his funeral, chanting sutras, burning incense, honoring the teacher who had transformed Chan Buddhism by insisting that the sacred and the ordinary were not two different things. At the ceremony, Yuanming found himself standing next to Fawu. They were both older now, both teaching younger monks, both carrying the lineage forward in their own ways. "I was jealous of you for years," Yuanming said quietly. Fawu looked at him with surprise, then smiled. "I know," he said. "I was jealous of you too." "Of me?" Yuanming was genuinely shocked. "You worked so hard," Fawu said. "You studied so diligently. I always felt like I was lazy compared to you, like I wasn't trying hard enough. I thought Mazu would see through me eventually and realize I was just coasting." They looked at each other and started laughing, not at themselves. Exactly, but at the absurdity of it all. Two monks, both jealous, both ashamed, both ordinary human beings doing their best. "Ordinary mind is the way," Yuanming said. "Nothing special," Fawu agreed. "Tonight, lying here with all your own difficult feelings, whatever they are, wherever they came from, you might consider this. What if there's nothing wrong with you? What if the messy, complicated, sometimes jealous, sometimes afraid, sometimes confused mind you actually have is not the obstacle to peace, but the only place peace can be found? Feel your breath, ordinary and unremarkable. Feel your body, aging or young, comfortable or uncomfortable, just exactly as it is. Feel whatever emotions are present: sadness, worry, loneliness, or perhaps just tiredness. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to eliminate the difficult parts. You only need to stop the war you've been waging against your own human heart." The jealous monk found peace not by conquering his jealousy, but by accepting that a mind containing jealousy was still ordinary mind, still the way, still Fundamentally, complete. Let your shoulders release. Let your jaw soften. Let all the ways you've been trying to be different than you are dissolve like morning mist. You are already whole, already ordinary, already home. This is ordinary mind. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be removed. Just this, exactly as it is. And as that settles into your bones, we continue on through the night, where other stories wait to show you different faces of this same simple truth. In the mountains of northern Thailand, during the early 20th century, in a forest monastery where mist hung between teak trees like silk scarves and the calls of gibbons echoed through the canopy at dawn, there lived a monk named Somchai, who had mastered every meditation practice except the one that mattered most. He could sit in meditation for hours without moving, his concentration so refined that he could track the arising and passing of individual thoughts like watching leaves drift down a stream. He had memorized vast portions of the Pali Canon and could recite the Metta Sutta, the Buddha's teaching on loving kindness in both Pali and Thai, with perfect pronunciation. His virtue was impeccable. He kept every one of the 227 monastic precepts with meticulous care. But there was one practice he could not do. No matter how hard he tried, he could not generate genuine loving kindness toward himself. The traditional metta practice, as taught in the Theravada texts and as passed down through generations of forest masters, began with directing love toward oneself. The instructions were clear. Sit quietly, visualize your own face in a peaceful mood, and repeat the ancient phrases. May I be free from danger. May I be free from mental suffering. May I be free from physical suffering. May I live happily. Somchai had tried this practice for 7 years. Ever since he'd ordained at age 19, every time he attempted it, the same thing happened. The moment he turned his attention toward himself with an intention of kindness, he encountered a wall of revulsion so intense it made his stomach clench. He would picture his own face and immediately see every flaw, every inadequacy, every way in which he had failed to live up to his own impossible standards. The inner voice would begin its familiar litany. You're not good enough. You're fundamentally defective. You don't deserve love. Other monks are naturally wise and compassionate. You're just pretending, going through the motions. Even your attempts at loving kindness are contaminated by ego. The self-hatred was so deeply woven into his sense of identity that he had learned to work around it. He had become skilled at generating metta for others, for his teacher, for fellow monks, for all beings everywhere. He could radiate compassion toward strangers, toward difficult people, even toward the mosquitoes that bit him during evening meditation. But toward himself, nothing but contempt, judgment, and a bone-deep conviction of unworthiness. His teacher, a renowned master named Ajahn Suwan, who had spent 40 years practicing in these forests, had noticed. The old teacher said nothing directly for a long time, but he watched. He saw how Somchai drove himself relentlessly, how he volunteered for the hardest tasks, how he never rested, never acknowledged his own needs, never treated himself with even a fraction of the kindness he showed to others. One afternoon during the dry season, when the heat pressed down like a weight and even the birds were silent, Ajahn Suwan called Somchai to his small wooden hut at the edge of the monastery grounds. The old teacher was sitting on a woven mat, his back against the wall, his weathered face peaceful in the dim light filtering through bamboo shutters. He gestured for Somchai to sit. "I want you to stop practicing metta," Ajahn Suwan said without preamble. Somchai felt a spike of panic. Metta practice was one of the 4 divine abodes. a core teaching of the Buddha. How could he stop? But Luang Por, Somchai said, using the respectful term for his teacher. The Metta Sutta teaches, I know what it teaches. The old monk interrupted gently. I want you to stop for a different reason. You've been practicing metta for 7 years, and you've become quite accomplished at generating loving kindness toward others. But you've been skipping the first step, haven't you? Somchai's face flushed. He nodded. Tell me what happens when you try to direct metta toward yourself. And so Somchai told him everything, the wall of self-hatred, the inner voice of criticism, the deep conviction that he was fundamentally unworthy, that any self-love would be narcissistic, that he needed to be harder on himself to become better. Ajahn Suwan listened without interrupting, his eyes half closed. When Somchai finished, the old teacher was quiet for a long moment. Do you know why the Buddha taught us to begin metta practice with ourselves? He finally asked. Because we should develop equanimity toward all beings equally? No, Ajahn Suwan said. Though that's true eventually. The Buddha began with self because he understood something essential. You cannot give what you do not have. A person who truly hates themselves will always generate a counterfeit compassion toward others, a compassion mixed with neediness, with a secret hope of earning worth through helping, with an underlying belief that everyone else deserves kindness except them. He shifted slightly, his old knees creaking. You've been trying to build a house starting with the roof. It doesn't work. The foundation must come first. And the foundation is self-love, not narcissism, not selfishness, but the simple recognition that you too are a being worthy of kindness. But I feel so much aversion toward myself. Somchai whispered, how can I generate love when all I feel is disgust? You can't. Ajahn Suwan said simply, that's why I'm telling you to stop practicing metta for now. Instead, I want you to practice something else. I want you to simply be with the self-hatred. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to replace it with love. Just notice it. Acknowledge it. Say hello to it. Somchai looked confused. The Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh teaches students to greet their difficult feelings. The old master explained, when anger arises, hello, anger, I see you. When fear arises, hello, fear, I see you. This is not suppression and it's not indulgence. It's recognition without resistance. So I should say, hello, self-hatred? Exactly, Ajahn Suwan said. And notice what happens. Don't try to make it go away. Don't judge yourself for having it. Just be curious about it. Where do you feel it in your body? What does it actually feel like beneath the words and stories? Over the following weeks, Somchai did as his teacher instructed. Instead of trying to force loving kindness toward himself, he simply acknowledged the self-hatred when it arose. Sitting in his meditation hut, he would notice the familiar contraction in his chest, the tightness in his throat, and instead of fighting it or being ashamed of it, he would say silently, hello, self-hatred. I see you. At first, nothing changed. The self-hatred remained as strong as ever. But gradually, something subtle began to shift. By acknowledging the feeling without resistance, he was no longer adding a second layer of suffering to it. He was no longer hating himself for hating himself. And in that small space of non-resistance, he began to notice something he had never seen before. The self-hatred wasn't constant. It arose, stayed for a while, and then faded, replaced by other feelings, tiredness, hunger, peace, curiosity. It was just a weather pattern in his mind, not a permanent truth about who he was. One morning during walking meditation on the forest path behind the monastery, Somchai noticed a baby gecko clinging to a tree trunk. It was tiny, translucent, its heart visible through its skin, beating rapidly. It looked incredibly vulnerable. Without thinking, Somchai found himself wishing, "May you be safe. May you live happily." The wish arose naturally, spontaneously, without effort. He felt genuine tenderness toward this small creature. And then a thought came, clear as a bell. This gecko has no particular virtue. It hasn't earned safety or happiness. It's just a small being trying to survive. And I wish it well simply because it exists, because it's alive, because wishing a being well is a natural response to seeing life. He stood very still on the path. The gecko scurried away into the underbrush. If he could wish a gecko well simply for existing, simply for being alive, why not himself? The question cracked something open in him. All these years, he had been operating from a belief that he needed to earn love, to deserve it through perfect behavior and spiritual achievement. But love wasn't something you earned. It was something you extended to beings simply because they existed, because they experienced pleasure and pain, because they were part of the shared fabric of life. That afternoon, during his meditation period, he tried the metta practice again, but differently than before. Instead of trying to force himself to feel loving kindness, he simply acknowledged what was true. He was a being who experienced suffering. He was a being who sometimes felt afraid, who got tired, who wanted to be happy, who didn't want to suffer. These were the natural wishes all beings had, as Ajahn Suwan had taught. No being wanted mental suffering, physical suffering, unhappiness, danger. These wishes weren't selfish, they were universal. "May I be free from danger," he whispered, and instead of the usual wall of resistance, he felt something soften. Not because he was special or deserving, but because he was just another being, no different from the gecko, no different from the mosquitoes, no different from any creature that wished to avoid pain and find peace. "May I be free from mental suffering." The self-hatred arose, sharp and familiar. But this time, instead of taking it as evidence of his unworthiness, he saw it for what it was: suffering, mental suffering, the very thing he had just wished to be free from. And in seeing the self-hatred as suffering rather than as truth, compassion arose not for some idealized version of himself, but for this actual being sitting here, this monk who was doing his best and struggling and confused and sincere and flawed and human. "May I be free from physical suffering. May I live happily." Tears came, not tears of self-pity, but tears of relief, as if a great burden he'd been carrying for 26 years had finally been set down. He went to Ajahn Suwan that evening and told him what had happened. The old teacher smiled. "Now you understand. Metta for yourself is not about believing you're wonderful. It's about recognizing that you're a being who suffers, and suffering is worthy of compassion. Always, without exception. Even your own. But I still feel the self-hatred sometimes," Somchai said. "Of course you do," Ajahn Suwan said. "Old patterns don't disappear overnight. But now when it arises, you can meet it with kindness. You can say, 'Hello, self-hatred. You're suffering too, aren't you? May you be at peace.' Extend metta to the self-hatred itself? Why not?" the teacher asked. "It's also just a condition arising, just another part of the mind trying to protect you in the only way it knows how. Even our difficult emotions deserve our compassion. Over the following months and years, Somchai's practice transformed. The self-hatred did gradually diminish, not because he fought it, but because he stopped feeding it with resistance and shame. When it arose, he would notice it, acknowledge it, sometimes even thank it for trying to keep him safe or motivated or improving. And the loving kindness he generated toward others became deeper, more genuine, because it was no longer built on a foundation of self-contempt. When he wished for others to be happy, it was no longer contaminated by a secret belief that everyone else deserved happiness except him. It was a recognition of the universal wish of all beings, himself included, to be free from suffering. He began teaching younger monks, and he would tell them what Ajahn Suwan had taught him. Start with yourself, not because you're more important than others, but because you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't give genuine love to others while believing you're unworthy of it. The Buddha's instruction to begin metta practice with ourselves is not selfishness, it's wisdom. It's recognizing that self-compassion and compassion for others are not separate things. They're two expressions of the same fundamental kindness. Years later, when Ajahn Suwan was dying, Somchai sat beside his teacher's sleeping mat, reciting the Metta Sutta softly. The old monk's breathing was labored, his body frail. When Somchai finished the recitation, Ajahn Suwan opened his eyes and smiled weakly. "Are you still practicing metta toward yourself?" he whispered. "Every day," Somchai said, "though I still forget sometimes. I still get caught in self-judgment." "Good," the teacher said, and his eyes twinkled. "If you never forgot, you might get arrogant about being so good at self-compassion. The practice is in the remembering, in catching yourself and beginning again. Always beginning again with kindness." Those were among the last words Ajahn Suwan spoke to him. In the years that followed, Somchai would become a teacher himself, eventually taking over as abbot of the forest monastery. And the first thing he would teach new monks was not concentration or mindfulness or insight, but metta practice starting with themselves. "May I be free from danger. May I be free from mental suffering. May I be free from physical suffering. May I live happily." He would watch their faces as they tried it, and he could always tell the ones who struggled, who met the same wall he had met, who encountered self-hatred and felt ashamed of encountering it. To them, he would say gently, "The self-hatred is not your enemy. It's a part of you that's suffering and needs your compassion most of all. You don't have to wait until you're perfect to deserve kindness. You deserve it now, exactly as you are, because you're a being who experiences pain and who wishes to be happy. That's enough. That's always been enough. Tonight, as you lie here with all your own inner voices, critical ones, judging ones, the parts that say you're not good enough or doing it right or worthy of peace, remember this. You too are a being who suffers. You too have the universal wish to be free from pain and to find happiness. Feel your breath moving through this body that has carried you all these years. Feel your heart beating in this chest, never asking permission, never waiting until you're perfect to keep you alive. May you be free from danger. May you be free from mental suffering. May you be free from physical suffering. May you live happily, not because you've earned it, not because you're special, but because you're alive, and that's enough. You're worthy of kindness simply because you exist. Let that settle into your bones. Let the gecko's worthiness be your worthiness. Let the self-hatred be met with the same gentle curiosity you'd offer any suffering being. You are allowed to be kind to yourself. The Buddha taught it first, for a reason. And as that truth sinks deeper than thought, into the quiet place where you already know it, we continue on through the night, where other teachers wait with other reminders of your inherent worthiness. In the high valleys of eastern Tibet, where the air was so thin it made newcomers dizzy and the sky stretched endlessly blue above snow-capped peaks, there lived a yogini named Pema, who had spent 15 years trying to become empty. She had left her village at 17, drawn by teachings she'd heard from a wandering lama about Dzogchen, the great perfection, which promised direct recognition of the mind's true nature. The lama had spoken of Rigpa, the primordial awareness that was spacious, is luminous, and utterly free. And Pema had felt something inside her leap toward that possibility, like a bird toward open sky. For 15 years, she had practiced in caves and hermitages scattered across the mountains, under the guidance of various teachers. She had learned visualization practices and mantra recitations. She had studied the view that all phenomena were empty of inherent existence. She had sat in meditation for hours, days, weeks at a time, trying to stop her thoughts, trying to create a blank, peaceful mind that would finally reveal the luminous awareness her teachers spoke of. But the harder she tried to stop thinking, the more thoughts arose. The more she tried to create inner peace, the more turbulent her mind became. Anger would arise, and she would push it away, telling herself that a true Dzogchen practitioner shouldn't feel anger. Desire would arise, and she would suppress it, ashamed that after all these years, she still experienced such ordinary human longings. Fear, sadness, restlessness, boredom, all of it seemed like evidence that she was failing, that she hadn't truly understood the teachings, that perhaps she wasn't capable of the realization that others achieved. Now 32 years old, living in a small stone hermitage at 11,000 feet, Pema felt more trapped than ever. She had given up everything, her family, the possibility of marriage and children, any normal life, for a liberation that seemed to recede further away, the harder she reached for it. One autumn morning, when the first snows had already dusted the high passes, an elderly nun arrived at Pema's hermitage. Her name was Ani Dechen, and she was so old that her age had become a joke among the practitioners in the region. Some said 90, some said 110. No one knew for certain. She walked with 2 staffs and moved very slowly, but her eyes were bright with something Pema couldn't name. I heard there was a young yogini up here who needed a teaching, Ani Dechen said, settling herself on Pema's meditation cushion without asking permission. So, I've climbed all this way to give you one. Make me some butter tea, child. Then we'll talk. Pema prepared the tea in silence, feeling both irritated and curious. When she handed the bowl to the old nun, Ani Dechen drank deeply, smacked her lips, and said, "Tell me about your practice." And so Pema told her everything, the years of effort, the constant failure to achieve the peaceful, thought-free mind she believed Dzogchen required, the shame of still experiencing ordinary emotions after so much practice, the growing despair that she would never realize the spacious awareness her teachers pointed toward. Ani Dechen listened without interrupting, occasionally sipping her tea. When Pema finished, the old nun set down her bowl and pointed toward the small window in the stone wall. "Look at the sky," she said. Pema looked. It was a typical autumn day in the high valleys, the sky vast and blue, with a few white clouds drifting across it. What do you see? Ani Dechen asked. Sky and clouds. Good. Now tell me, does the sky mind the clouds? Pema frowned. What do you mean? When a cloud appears, the old nun said patiently, does the sky try to push it away? When the cloud is dark and heavy with rain, does the sky become anxious about it? When the cloud drifts on and disappears, does the sky feel relieved? Does the sky make any effort at all regarding the clouds? No, Pema said slowly. The sky just holds the clouds. They appear in it, move through it, dissolve. The sky doesn't change. And yet, Ani Dechen continued, does the cloud pollute the sky? When 1,000 storm clouds gather, do they make the sky itself dark? When they rain, does the sky become wet? No. The sky remains sky. The clouds move through it but don't change its nature. So, the old nun said, leaning forward with sudden intensity, why have you been trying to become a sky with no clouds? Why have you spent 15 years at war with the weather of your own mind? The question landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward through Pema's understanding. I thought. Pema began, then stopped. I thought the goal was to stop thinking, to stop having emotions, to create a quiet, empty mind. That, Ani Dechen said, is the most common and most devastating misunderstanding of Dzogchen. You've been trying to clear the sky by fighting the clouds. But the teaching isn't about having no clouds. It's about recognizing that you are the sky, not the weather. She picked up her bowl of tea, drained it, and gestured for Pema to pour more. Listen carefully. Your mind has two aspects. There is Sem, the ordinary thinking mind, the part that generates thoughts and emotions like clouds forming in the atmosphere. And there is Rigpa, the spacious awareness that is the nature of mind itself, the sky in which all experiences arise and dissolve. I've heard this teaching before, Pema said. But how do I access Rigpa? How do I become the sky instead of identifying with the clouds? There's your mistake, Ani Dechen said, almost laughing. You're already the sky. You've always been the sky. You can't become what you already are. The question is not how to access Rigpa, but how to recognize that awareness is already present, already functioning, already the space in which your thoughts and emotions are appearing right now. Pema felt something shift, though she couldn't name it yet. Right now, the old nun continued, thoughts are arising in your mind. Yes, Pema nodded. Notice them. What are you thinking? I'm wondering if I understand what you're saying. I'm thinking about all the years I've wasted. I'm feeling frustrated that I didn't understand this earlier. Good. Now, notice. Who is aware of these thoughts? Pema started to answer, then stopped. There was awareness of the thoughts. The thoughts were arising, being known, and dissolving. But the awareness that knew them wasn't itself a thought. It wasn't changing. It was like the sky holding clouds. That awareness, Ani Dechen said softly, that's Rigpa. That's the nature of mind. It's not something you need to create or achieve. It's not hidden somewhere behind your thoughts. It's the very space, the very knowing quality, in which thoughts are appearing and being recognized. But it seems so ordinary, Pema whispered. Of course it does, the old nun slapped her knee. That's why the teachings call it the ordinary mind, or the natural state. It's utterly simple, completely ordinary, always present. It's so close that people miss it, looking for something more special, more dramatic. They think enlightenment should feel like being struck by lightning, should involve stopping all thoughts and entering some extraordinary trance state. So they spend years trying to manufacture experiences instead of recognizing what's already here. Ani Dechen shifted on the cushion, her old bones creaking. The Dzogchen teaching has 3 essential points, which are sometimes called the 3 words that strike the vital point. Listen. First, direct introduction. Someone points out the nature of mind directly shows you that awareness is already present. Second, remaining without doubt. You trust the recognition and don't keep questioning whether this simple awareness could really be it. Third, continuing with confidence. You maintain the recognition in all activities, all states. But what about the clouds? Pema asked. What about all my thoughts and emotions? They're still there. Of course they are, Ani Dechen said. Clouds are the natural expression of the sky's energy and moisture meeting certain conditions. Thoughts and emotions are the natural expression of mind's energy meeting the conditions of life. You have eyes, so you see. You have ears, so you hear. You have mind, so thoughts arise. This is not a problem unless you believe that you are the thoughts instead of the awareness in which they appear. She leaned closer. Tell me, right now, is anger present? Pema checked. No, not right now. Then where is the anger you felt yesterday when the village boy threw rocks at your hermitage? It's gone. Gone where? If you were the anger, if anger was your true nature, it couldn't disappear. But it arose, stayed for a while, and dissolved back into the space of awareness, like a cloud forming and dissolving back into sky. The sky, your awareness, remained unchanged throughout. Pema sat very still. Something was shifting in her understanding, like fog beginning to thin. For 15 years, Ani Dechen said, you've been trying to get rid of the clouds so you could be the sky. But you've always been the sky. The clouds never touched you. Sadness appeared. The sky noticed sadness. Anger appeared. The sky noticed anger. Joy, fear, boredom, peace, confusion, all of it, just weather moving through the unchanging spaciousness of awareness. Then what's the practice? Pema asked. If I'm already the sky, what am I supposed to do? Rest as the sky. The old nun said simply, when a thought arises, don't try to push it away like you've been doing. Don't identify with it either, as if you are the thought. Just notice, a thought is appearing in awareness. When an emotion arises, don't suppress it or judge yourself for having it. Notice, an emotion is appearing in awareness. The awareness itself spacious, luminous, unaffected, is always already here. She stood up slowly, leaning on her staffs. I'm going to leave you now. But before I go, I'll give you a practice that my own teacher gave me 70 years ago. It's very simple. Go outside and practice sky gazing. Sky gazing? Sit or stand where you can see a large expanse of sky. Rest your gaze on the open blue, not focusing on any particular thing. Let your awareness become as spacious as the sky you're looking at. When thoughts arise, and they will notice that they're like clouds appearing in the vast space, you don't need to do anything about them. They arise in awareness, move through awareness, dissolve back into awareness. The awareness itself never changes, never becomes cloudy, never becomes clear. It simply is. Ani Dechen walked to the door, then paused. The sky doesn't try to be the sky. It doesn't practice being spacious. It simply is spacious. This is what we call self-arising liberation. Thoughts and emotions arising and freeing themselves in the very space of their appearance, without you needing to do anything. Not because you're suppressing them, not because you're indulging them, but because you're recognizing them as the natural display of awareness itself. After the old nun left, Pema sat for a long time in her hermitage, simply noticing. Thoughts arose. Did I understand what she taught? Was that really it? Seems too simple. And with each thought, she noticed the awareness that knew the thought spacious, unchanging, like sky. An emotion arose, a flutter of excitement mixed with uncertainty, and she noticed the awareness that knew the emotion, not the emotion itself, but the knowing space in which it appeared. That afternoon, she went outside and practiced sky gazing as Ani Dechen had instructed. She sat on a flat rock and let her gaze rest on the vast blue above the mountains. At first, her mind was busy with thoughts. This is silly. I should be doing real practice. What if someone sees me just staring at the sky? But gradually, something shifted. The spaciousness of the outer sky seemed to mirror an inner spaciousness. Thoughts arose like clouds, but she wasn't trapped in them anymore. She was the space in which they appeared vast, open, unaffected. A dark thought arose. You've wasted 15 years. And instead of getting caught in the story, she noticed a thought appearing in awareness, like a dark cloud appearing in sky. The sky doesn't become dark. The awareness doesn't become sad. It simply holds the experience, spacious and luminous. Joy arose. Maybe I finally understand. And she noticed a thought appearing in awareness, like a bright cloud appearing in sky. Over the following weeks and months, Pema's practice transformed. She stopped trying to achieve a state of no thought. Instead, she simply rested as awareness, the spacious knowing in which all experience appeared. Sometimes the sky of her mind was full of clouds, thoughts, emotions, sensations arising rapidly. Sometimes it was relatively clear, but she was learning not to identify with the weather, not to believe that she was the clouds. The most surprising discovery was that emotions didn't need to be pushed away or indulged. When anger arose, if she simply recognized it as awareness appearing in the form of anger, it would move through and dissolve naturally, not because she suppressed it, but because it was never solid in the first place. It was always just energy arising and releasing in the space of awareness. Years later, students would come to Pema's hermitage seeking teachings, and the first thing she would do was take them outside and have them look at the sky. Notice, she would say, the sky doesn't try to get rid of clouds. It doesn't judge itself for having weather. It simply is spacious, open, luminous. This is what your awareness is like. You've spent your whole life believing you are the weather, the thoughts, the emotions, the constant changing experiences. But you're not the weather. You're the sky. You've always been the sky. And sometimes, if the student really heard it, she would see their face change the way her own face must have changed that day when Ani Dechen pointed out what had been there all along. Tonight, lying here with all your thoughts and feelings moving through your mind like weather systems, what if you're not the storm? What if you're the sky? Feel your awareness right now. Not your thoughts about awareness, but the actual knowing quality that's present, that which is reading these words, noticing your breath, aware of the sounds around you or the silence. That awareness doesn't come and go like thoughts do. It's always here. It's the space in which everything else appears: anxiety and peace, confusion and clarity, fatigue and alertness. All of it just weather moving through the unchanging sky of your basic awareness. You don't have to become peaceful. You don't have to stop thinking. You don't have to be different than you are. You only have to recognize that you are the space, not the weather. The sky that holds everything. The sky that's never stained by clouds. The sky that doesn't try to be the sky, it simply is. Rest as that. Let everything else be as it is, arising and dissolving in the vast spaciousness that you've always been. And as that recognition deepens, settling below thought into the simply aware space that needs no fixing, we move now toward the final teaching of the night, where even understanding itself can be released. In the forests of northeast Thailand, where the nights were black as ink and the sounds of insects created a steady hum like the world breathing, there lived an old monk named Ajahn Prasad who was preparing to die. He was 93 years old and had been a forest monk for 70 years, most of them spent in solitary retreat in caves and simple huts scattered through the jungle. Now his body was failing quietly, without drama, just a slow winding down like a clock running out of spring. He knew it was coming. He could feel it in his bones, in the way food no longer interested him, in the heaviness that made even sitting up an effort. The other monks at the small forest monastery had offered to take him to a hospital, but Ajahn Prasad had smiled and shaken his head. He had spent his whole life preparing for this moment. Why would he want to be anywhere else? A young monk named Somdet had been assigned to care for him in these final days. Somdet was 24, earnest and kind, and clearly nervous about being in the presence of death. He brought water. Ajahn Prasad didn't drink, offered food the old monk barely touched, and sat nearby, trying to be helpful while his anxiety filled the small hut like smoke. One evening, as the sun set and the jungle began its nightly symphony, Somdet found the courage to ask what he'd been wondering for days. "Luangpur," he said, using the respectful term for the elder monk. "Are you afraid?" Ajahn Prasad was lying on his sleeping mat, looking at the wooden ceiling. He turned his head slowly, everything was slow now, and smiled at the young monk. "Afraid of what?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Of dying." "Ah." The old monk was quiet for a moment. "Come closer. Sit here where I can see you without turning my head." Somdet moved to sit beside the mat, and in the dim light filtering through the bamboo walls, he could see how thin Ajahn Prasad had become, how his skin seemed translucent, as if he was already halfway to dissolving. "Tell me," the old monk said, "are you afraid to sleep each night?" Somdet blinked. "Sleep? No. Of course not." "Why not?" "When you sleep, everything you know disappears. Your thoughts stop. The world vanishes. You have no control. You don't know if you'll wake up, and yet you lie down each night without fear. Why? Because..." Somdet struggled to articulate what seemed obvious. "Because sleep is natural. Because the body needs it. Because I've done it thousands of times and I always wake up." "Just so," Ajahn Prasad said, and his eyes twinkled. "Dying is the same. Natural. Necessary. And I've practiced it every night for 70 years. I don't understand." The old monk shifted slightly, and Somdet quickly adjusted the pillow behind his head. When Ajahn Prasad spoke again, His voice was even softer, as if speaking was becoming too much effort. Every night, when you lie down to sleep, you practice dying. You let go of the day. You release control. You allow yourself to dissolve into unconsciousness. The Buddha taught that sleep and death are cousins, the small death and the great death. Every night, you die a little. Every morning, you're reborn. If you can surrender to sleep peacefully, you already know how to surrender to death peacefully. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. Somdet thought he had fallen asleep, but then the eyes opened again. "I'm not afraid," Ajahn Prasad continued. "I'm tired. This body has served me well for 93 years. It's worn out. It wants to rest, and I'm ready to let it rest." "But what happens after?" Somdet asked, and heard his own voice crack slightly. "After sleep, what happens? You wake up, or you dream, or nothing, or everything." The old monk's hand moved slightly, a gesture Somdet recognized as an invitation to stop asking questions that had no answers. The body will do what bodies do, earth returning to earth, water to water, fire to fire, air to air. The consciousness will do what consciousness does. I don't need to manage it. I don't need to understand it. I only need to allow it. Over the next few days, Somdet watched Ajahn Prasad slip further away. The old monk slept more and more, waking for shorter and shorter periods. When awake, he spoke little, but his presence was profoundly peaceful, not the peace of someone fighting for calm, but the natural stillness of someone who had truly let go. On what turned out to be the final evening, Ajahn Prasad woke from sleep as the last light was fading. He gestured for water, and Somdet carefully helped him drink a few sips. Then the old monk looked at him with extraordinary clarity. "Tonight," he said. Somdet felt his heart clench. "Should I call the abbot? The other monks? No need. Just sit with me. That's enough." So Somdet sat, cross-legged beside the sleeping mat. As the night deepened, he tried to meditate but couldn't focus. His mind kept racing with thoughts. Should I be doing something? Should I be chanting? What if he needs help? What will I do when it happens? After perhaps an hour, Ajahn Prasad spoke again, though his eyes remained closed. "You're making so much noise with your mind," he said, and there was gentle amusement in his voice. "I can hear you worrying from here. I'm sorry, Luangpur. I don't know how to be with this. Just be with it as it is. Not as you think it should be. I'm dying. This is what dying looks like. An old body winding down. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you need to fix or change or understand. Just this." The old monk's breathing had become very shallow. Somdet could barely see his chest moving. "I'm going to sleep now," Ajahn Prasad whispered. "Maybe I'll wake again. Maybe I won't. Either way, it's fine. Should I stay awake to be here with you, if you want? Or sleep if you're tired? The body knows what to do whether anyone is watching or not. But if you stay awake, stay present. Don't get lost in worry about what's happening. Just be here. Just notice." Somdet nodded, though he wasn't sure the old monk could see him anymore. For the next several hours, Somdet sat in the darkness. He'd let the oil lamp burn down to nothing and simply listened. Ajahn Prasad's breathing was so quiet that sometimes Somdet held his own breath to hear if the old monk was still breathing. The jungle outside continued its rhythms. Insects called. Something rustled in the underbrush. A nightbird sang its strange descending song. And inside the hut, an old man was letting go. Somdet found himself thinking about what Ajahn Prasad had said about sleep. How every night we practice dissolution. How we let go of control, of knowing, of being someone. How we trust the body to keep breathing, the heart to keep beating, without our conscious management. How we surrender to not knowing and wake up fine. Around midnight, Somdet guessed by the position of the stars through the gaps in the bamboo walls, Ajahn Prasad's breathing changed. It became even more subtle, with long pauses between each breath. Somdet's heart was pounding, but he remembered, just be here. Just notice. Breath. Long pause. Breath. Longer pause. The pauses stretched out like a cat waking from sleep, each one extending further into silence. And then, without drama or struggle, the breathing simply stopped. Somdet sat very still. The jungle continued its night sounds. The darkness was complete. He felt for a pulse at the old monk's wrist, found none. Placed his hand near Ajahn Prasad's mouth, felt no breath. The old monk had slipped away as quietly as falling asleep. Somdet sat with the body through the rest of the night, as was customary, allowing the consciousness time to complete its dissolution before disturbing the body. He expected to feel grief or fear, but what he felt instead was a profound stillness. Ajahn Prasad's final teaching had been the teaching of his dying, that letting go could be this simple, this natural, this peaceful. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside, Somdet finally rose stiffly from his seat and walked out of the hut. The forest was already awake, birds calling, light filtering green through the canopy, mist rising from the earth. He would tell the abbot soon. They would prepare the body, inform the nearby villages, to arrange the funeral. But for now, he stood in the cool morning air and felt something he couldn't name, a recognition that what he'd witnessed wasn't an ending, but a natural part of the rhythm he participated in every day. Waking and sleeping, arising and dissolving, the breath coming and going, until one day it doesn't come back. And that's okay too. Ajahn Prasad had spent 70 years learning to let go. And in the end, when the final letting go came, he had surrendered to it as peacefully as lying down for sleep. Tonight, you too are practicing this surrender. Not the final one. Not yet. But the small death that visits you each night when you release the day and allow yourself to dissolve into rest. Feel how natural it is. How you've done it thousands of times. How the body knows exactly what to do when you stop trying to manage everything. The old monk was right. Sleep and death are cousins. Every night you practice dying. Every night you let go of knowing, of controlling, of being someone. Every night you trust the dissolution process, trusting you'll wake again, though you never really know for certain. And you do it so easily, so naturally, without fear. Your breath is slowing now. Your thoughts are becoming less urgent. The world is receding. This is what you know how to do. This is what the body was made for. You don't need to hold on to these teachings. You don't need to remember anything. In fact, the invitation tonight is to forget, to let go even of wisdom, even of understanding, even of the effort to be awake. Just like Ajahn Prasad, you can simply allow the dissolution, allow the day to fall away, Allow your thoughts to quiet without forcing them. Allow your body to be held by the bed, by gravity, by the earth beneath you. Nothing to achieve, nothing to understand, nothing to remember. Just the breath slowing, the mind releasing, the gentle spiral down into the darkness that holds you every night and has never failed to be safe. Sleep is waiting. Rest is waiting. The small death that brings tomorrow's small rebirth. And for now, you need only this, the permission to let go, the permission to forget, the permission to dissolve into the darkness like a breath dissolving into air. Nothing more to do, nothing more to be, just this gentle falling, this natural surrender, this sleep that your body has been waiting for. Let it take you. Let it hold you. Let everything go. The old monk is at peace. The night is at peace. And you, too, can be at peace. Just sleep now. Just rest. Just allow the dissolution. Everything else can wait until morning. The night has carried you through 8 journeys, 8 teachers, showing you the same truth in different forms. From the mountains of Tibet to the forests of Thailand, from 16th century Japan to 20th century Korea, the wisdom has been won. You are already whole, already worthy, already home. Milarepa learned that darkness can become a teacher. Jinwoo discovered that the ox and the herder were always one. Lien found that mud is the condition of blooming. Kiyoshi saw that cracks are where light enters. Yuan Ming stopped shooting himself with second arrows. Somchai met self-hatred with compassion. Pema recognized herself as sky, not weather. And the old monk Ajahn Prasad showed that letting go is as natural as sleep. These aren't separate lessons. They're 8 faces of acceptance, the great allowing that brings peace not by eliminating difficulty but by changing your relationship with it. You don't need to remember the stories. You don't need to practice the teachings. You don't even need to understand. The wisdom works beneath understanding, like seeds growing in darkness, transforming you in ways you won't notice until you look back months from now and realize something shifted. Something softened. The war with yourself grew quieter. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, you carry this permission to be exactly as you are, with all your shadows, all your cracks, all your ordinary human messiness, not despite these things but including them, held in them, complete because of them. Your breath is dissolving into the night. Your thoughts are dissolving into silence. Your body is dissolving into rest. And the awareness that holds it all vast as sky, steady as earth remains, always here, never needing to be anywhere else or anything else. You are already what you've been seeking, already worthy of the kindness you've been withholding, already complete in this exact imperfect moment. Sleep now. Let these truths work below the level of thinking. Let the night hold you as you've been held every night of your life. May you rest deeply. May you wake gently. May you walk tomorrow knowing you are enough. Exactly as you are. Exactly as you've always been. Good night.